The wind howled outside like a living thing, rattling the thin windows of Lena's tiny apartment. Rain hammered the rooftop in relentless sheets, dripping through the leaky spot in the corner she had tried patching with duct tape. The power had flickered twice that evening, and Lena prayed it would hold. Without the heater, the cold would creep in fast. She tucked the worn blanket tighter around her 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, who was curled up on the sagging couch bed. The little girl's eyelids drooped, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the small space heater Lena had scraped together the money for. "Mommy, will it still be raining in the morning?" Sophie murmured sleepily. "Maybe," Lena said with a gentle smile, brushing back her daughter's hair. "But storms always pass, sweetheart." She kissed Sophie's forehead, trying not to let her worry show. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound was sharp, urgent. Lena froze. It was nearly midnight. No one ever visited this late, and in this neighborhood, a stranger at the door could mean trouble. She moved quietly, her bare feet silent on the creaky floorboards, and peeked through the peephole. At first, all she saw was darkness and rain. Then a shadow shifted, revealing a man standing on her doorstep. His coat was soaked through, plastered to his frame, and his hair dripped water onto the welcome mat. Even through the glass, she could see the way his shoulders shook from the cold. "Please," his voice was muffled by the door but carried a note of desperation. I just need somewhere to stay for the night." Lena's heart pounded. She should say no. She had Sophie to think about. But as she looked at him again, his pale lips, trembling hands, and eyes that looked more weary than dangerous, her grip on the door loosened. She cracked it open just enough to speak. "I don't know you." "I understand," the man said quickly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "I'll leave in the morning. Just, anywhere dry. Please." The rain gusted in sideways, spraying her bare feet with icy water. She hesitated only a moment longer before sighing and unlatching the chain. "You can sleep on the couch. That's all." He nodded gratefully, stepping inside and dripping puddles on her faded carpet. She handed him an old blanket and gestured toward the living room. "Thank you," he murmured, voice low. Lena didn't reply. She simply locked the door again, checked on Sophie, still sleeping, and retreated to her small bedroom. As she lay in bed listening to the storm outside, she told herself she had just done a small kindness for someone in need. She didn't ask his name. She didn't want to know. She couldn't have guessed that the stranger shivering on her couch tonight was the man who would change her life forever. The next morning, the rain had slowed to a cold drizzle, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the gray light. Lena woke early, instinctively checking on Sophie before stepping quietly into the living room. The man was still there, asleep on the couch, curled up under the blanket she'd given him. In the dim light, he looked different, less like a stranger on her doorstep and more like someone who had been through too much in too little time. His hair was messy but clean, his jaw rough with stubble. His shoes sat neatly beside the couch, mud crusted along the edges. When she moved toward the kitchen, the creak of the floorboards made him stir. He blinked, sitting up quickly, as if expecting to be told to leave. "You're up," Lena said softly, keeping her tone neutral. He rubbed his eyes, offering a small, awkward smile. "Yeah. I didn't mean to oversleep." She poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs, adding a pinch of tea leaves to each. "It's fine. You can warm up before you go." When she handed him the steaming mug, his hands lingered around it like it was the first warmth he'd felt in days. "Thank you," he murmured. Lena hesitated for a moment before slicing the last piece of bread she had, thick and a little stale, but still good. She spread the tiniest bit of jam over it, then slid the plate toward him. "You don't have to," he began. "It's just bread," she cut in. "Eat." For a moment, they sat in quiet, sipping tea, the hum of the old fridge filling the silence. Then he spoke. "My name's Ethan," he said. "I was Traveling for work, but things didn't go as planned. Got stuck here, lost my things. I'm trying to get back on my feet. Lena studied him for a moment. There was no arrogance in his voice, just honesty. Still, she didn't press for details. I work at the cafe down the street. Part-time. He nodded. And your little girl? Sophie, Lena said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She's 6. Smart. Talks too much. Thinks rainstorms are magic. Ethan chuckled softly. Sounds like a good way to see the world. She glanced at him then, really looked at him. And noticed the way his eyes softened when he spoke, as though he meant every word. When the clock struck 8, Lena rose from the table. I need to take Sophie to school and get to work. You can lock the door from inside, just slide the key under the mat before you go. Ethan stood, awkwardly pulling on his damp coat. I won't forget this. Not ever. She shrugged. It's nothing. Just, stay out of trouble. By the time she returned later that afternoon, he was gone. The couch was neatly arranged, the blanket folded. It wasn't until she reached for the sugar jar to make herself tea that she noticed it, a small folded note tucked beneath it. In careful handwriting, it read. Thank you for your kindness when I had nothing to give. E. Lena stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it into her apron pocket. She didn't know why, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. 2 weeks passed. Life had returned to its usual rhythm for Lena. Waking before dawn, making Sophie's breakfast, walking her to school, then rushing to her shift at the cafe. The mornings were still cold, but the rain had mostly gone, replaced by a pale winter sun. She hadn't seen or heard from Ethan since that night. Part of her assumed he had moved on, maybe found work, maybe gone home, wherever that was. She had told herself it didn't matter. She'd done her part, offered a stranger shelter. That was the end of it. Or so she thought. That morning, when she arrived at the cafe, the air was buzzing with unusual energy. Her coworker, Maya, was wiping down the counter far more aggressively than usual, practically bouncing on her toes. Did you hear? Maya whispered, leaning in. The new CEO of the company is visiting today. In person. Lena blinked. CEO? Why would someone that important come here? Maya shrugged dramatically. Apparently, he's been touring stores in the area before officially taking over. Today it's our turn. So, you know. She gestured at Lena's uniform. Try not to spill coffee on him. Lena smirked. I'll do my best. The morning rush came and went. Around 11, the manager called everyone to gather in the back office for a special introduction. Lena, wiping her hands on her apron, slipped into the room, only to stop dead in the doorway. Sitting at the head of the small conference table, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and polished leather shoes, was Ethan. Her breath caught in her throat. His hair was neatly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, and his entire presence radiated quiet authority. He was speaking with the regional manager when his gaze flicked toward the door, and landed on her. For a moment, his expression froze, then softened into a small, knowing smile. Ah, the regional manager was saying, everyone, meet Ethan Ward, our new CEO. CEO. The word seemed to echo in Lena's head. She must have heard wrong. This was the same man who had been shivering on her couch 2 weeks ago, wearing a coat that looked ready to fall apart. Ethan rose to his feet, shaking hands with each employee, thanking them for their work. When he reached her, his eyes held hers for just a beat longer than necessary. Lena, he said in a voice only she could hear. Good to see you again. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. You, she almost said, lied to me, but stopped. He hadn't lied, he just hadn't told her who he really was. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Ethan spoke about his vision for the company, about improving employee support, and about wanting to connect with staff on a personal level. His words were met with nods and polite applause. When it was over, everyone scattered back to their stations, buzzing with comments about how young and down-to-earth the new CEO seemed. Lena kept her head down, wiping tables, trying to process what she'd just learned. Near the end of her shift, she felt a presence beside her. "You're avoiding me," Ethan said lightly. She glanced up. "I'm working." "That's not why," he replied, his tone calm but certain. She set down the cloth and crossed her arms. "2 weeks ago, you were stranded, wet, and had nothing but a torn coat. Now she gestured at his suit. "This." He gave a half smile. "Both are true." "I don't understand." "You will," he said simply. "But not here." He glanced toward the door, where the regional manager was calling him. "Can we talk after your shift?" Her first instinct was to say no, after all, she barely knew him. But something in his expression, that same quiet sincerity she'd noticed that rainy night, made her pause. "Fine. After work," she said. He smiled, the same small, grateful smile he'd worn the morning she gave him bread and tea. "I'll be here." As she returned to wiping tables, Lena's mind raced. Whatever this was, it felt like the beginning of an answer she hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. Lena's shift ended just after sunset. The cafe's lights glowed warmly against the darkening street outside, casting long golden streaks across the wet pavement. Customers had thinned to a trickle, and the last of her coworkers waved goodbye as they headed home. Ethan was still there. He sat at a corner table near the window, his suit jacket draped neatly over the chair, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked less like the commanding CEO she'd seen in the meeting and more like the man who had sipped tea at her kitchen table 2 weeks ago. When she approached, he stood. "Thanks for staying." "I'm still trying to figure out why I'm here," she replied, sliding into the seat opposite him. He smiled faintly, then grew serious. "That night, when I knocked on your door, I wasn't just passing through. I've been visiting stores in the area, trying to see what the company looked like from the ground up. I didn't want to be recognized, so I traveled quietly, without the corporate entourage. But my bag was stolen at the train station, wallet, phone, everything. I couldn't even prove who I was if I tried." Lena frowned. "So you just wandered around in the rain?" "I went to a cheap motel, but they wouldn't let me stay without ID. Tried to get help, but no one wanted to deal with a wet, broke stranger at midnight. By the time I found myself on your street, I was exhausted, cold, and honestly, a little scared." She thought back to the way his hands had trembled when he held the tea mug. "You didn't tell me who you were." He shook his head. "I didn't think it mattered. You opened your door to me without asking for anything. No questions, no judgment. That doesn't happen often, not to people like me. People like you. People who spend too much time in boardrooms and forget what it's like to be on the other side of the counter," he said quietly. "I've worked my way up, but somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing the people who keep everything running. That night, you reminded me what kindness looks like when it's not expecting a return." Lena looked away, embarrassed by the weight in his voice. "It wasn't a big deal. I just couldn't leave you outside in that storm." "It was a big deal to me," he said firmly. "You didn't just give me a place to stay, you gave me a moment to breathe when I was running on empty. And when I left, I promised myself I'd find a way to thank you." She studied him for a long moment, trying to reconcile the two versions of Ethan she'd seen, the shivering stranger and the confident executive. "You could have sent a thank you card. You didn't have to, whatever this is." "This," he said with a small smile, "is me making sure someone I respect has the opportunities she deserves." Her brow furrowed. "Opportunities? You work hard," he said simply. "I noticed that today, just like I noticed it in the way you manage your home, the way you take care of your daughter. I also noticed the cafe here is understaffed, and the pay isn't enough for someone raising a child alone. A lump formed in Lena's throat. She didn't like pity, but there was no pity in his voice, only observation. I want to offer you a position at our headquarters, Ethan continued. Full-time. Better salary, full benefits, regular hours so you can be with Sophie. You'd be perfect for it. She stared at him, stunned. Why me? You barely know me. I know enough, he said. And I believe in investing in good people when I meet them. For a moment, she didn't trust her voice. She looked out the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. Part of her wanted to say no, that accepting something so big felt like taking advantage. But deep down, she knew opportunities like this didn't come twice. Finally, she looked back at him. I'll think about it. Ethan's smile was warm, but not pressing. That's all I ask. As they stood to leave, he held the door open for her. The cold air hit her face, but it felt different now, less biting, more like a clean slate. She still didn't fully understand why he'd chosen her. But for the first time in years, Lena felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. A week later, Lena stood in her small kitchen, staring at the envelope in her hands. It had arrived that morning, thick, cream-colored paper with her name written in elegant handwriting. The return address was the corporate headquarters of the cafe chain. She'd been turning it over and over ever since, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say. Finally, with Sophie tugging at her sweater and asking, "What is it, Mommy?" Lena slid a finger under the seal. Inside was a typed letter. Dear Ms. Harper. It is my pleasure to offer you the position of Customer Relations Coordinator at our headquarters. This position includes full-time hours, competitive salary, and comprehensive benefits for you and your dependent. Please find details enclosed. I look forward to seeing the kindness and integrity you show in your everyday life reflected in our company's work. Ethan Ward, CEO. Lena's vision blurred, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Sophie's curious little hands reached for the letter, and Lena let her hold it. Is this good news? Sophie asked, eyes wide. Lena laughed through the lump in her throat. Yes, baby. The best news. The following Monday, she stood in the gleaming glass lobby of the headquarters building, feeling small and out of place. The floors shone like mirrors, and employees bustled past in pressed suits and polished shoes. Lena smoothed her thrift store blazer, suddenly aware of every wrinkle. A voice behind her made her turn. You look perfect. Ethan was there, his suit impeccable as always, but his smile warm and familiar. I feel like I'm in the wrong place, she admitted quietly. You belong here, he said simply, leading her toward the elevators. The first weeks were a whirlwind. The work was challenging, but Lena quickly discovered she had a knack for it, listening to customers, resolving complaints, finding solutions. Ethan checked in often, not in the formal, distant way of most executives, but with genuine interest. He asked about Sophie, even sent her a small care package of art supplies after Lena mentioned her daughter loved to draw. One evening, as Lena left the office, she caught sight of Ethan in the lobby. He was speaking to a security guard, laughing at something the man said. The sight made her smile. Here was a man who could command a boardroom but still stopped to share a laugh with someone most CEOs would walk past. Months passed. The extra income meant Lena could move Sophie into a safer neighborhood, closer to a good school. She bought a second-hand car, replaced her leaking roof, and for the first time in years, she didn't have to choose between paying bills and buying groceries. One rainy afternoon, almost a year after the night they first met, Lena found herself standing in her new kitchen, making tea as Sophie worked on homework at the table. She thought about how much had changed, how far they'd come. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. Hope you're not busy. Look outside. Confused, Lena walked to the front window. A sleek black car was parked at the curb. Ethan stepped out, holding an umbrella and a small box. When she opened the door, he grinned. "I was in the neighborhood." She raised an eyebrow. "And you brought?" He handed her the box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with the words, "Storms pass." Her throat tightened. "Ethan. It's just a reminder," he said softly. "That night, you told your daughter storms always pass. You were right. They do. And sometimes, they leave something better behind." She smiled, blinking back tears. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Sophie came to the door then, waving at Ethan and inviting him in for tea. He accepted, ducking inside and setting his umbrella by the door. The three of them sat together, steam rising from their mugs, rain tapping gently against the windows. For Lena, it was more than tea on a rainy day. It was the feeling of safety, of possibility, of knowing that sometimes, kindness to a stranger can rewrite your entire story. Outside, the storm rolled on, but inside, there was warmth, laughter, and the quiet certainty that life had changed forever. And for the first time in a very long time, Lena wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring.